cardboard boxes stacked precariously in the hallway seemed to mock my optimism. A fresh start, I'd told myself, a mantra against the lingering shadows of my past. Apartment 3B, a small, slightly musty space in an older building, was supposed to be my sanctuary. I'd chosen it for its quiet, its affordability, and the promise of anonymity. The first few days were a blur of unpacking, arranging, and trying to ignore the unsettling creaks and groans of the building. My neighbor in 3A was a mystery. I'd seen him only once, a gaunt, pale man with eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He'd nodded curtly, a ghost of a greeting, and disappeared back into his apartment. Then the notes started. The first one arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under my door while I was making coffee. A small, folded piece of paper with stark, angular handwriting. It read, "The walls are thin." A shiver ran down my spine, a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. I glanced at the shared wall, the plaster rough and old. Of course, the walls are thin, I thought, trying to dismiss it. It's an old building. The next note arrived 2 days later. The window watches. This time, the fear was more pronounced. My apartment faced a narrow alleyway, the opposite building a blank brick wall. There was only one window that could possibly be meant, his. The window of 3A. I peered out, but the curtains were drawn, a thin, off-white fabric that obscured whatever lay behind. I began to notice things I'd previously overlooked. The faint, almost imperceptible sound of footsteps in the hallway when I was alone. The feeling of being watched, even when I was inside my own apartment. I'd catch glimpses of movement from my peripheral vision, a shadow passing the peephole, a rustle from the other side of the shared wall. My anxiety grew with each passing day. I started locking my door, even when I was just stepping out to take the trash down. I checked the peephole obsessively, my eyes straining to see beyond the distorted lens. I found myself avoiding the window, pulling the blinds shut against the alley's dim light. Then came the third note. The cat is gone. I didn't own a cat. The implication, however, was clear. It was a subtle, insidious way of letting me know he was observing me, noticing every detail of my life, even the things that didn't exist. I started to see him more often. He'd be standing at his window, a shadowy figure framed by the drawn curtains, his gaze fixed on mine. Or he'd be in the hallway, leaning against the wall, his expression unreadable. He never spoke, never made a sound, just watched. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, oppressive silence that filled the apartment building, a silence that amplified every creak, every rustle, every imagined sound. One evening, I was cooking dinner, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables a small comfort against the growing tension. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the apartment into darkness. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I fumbled for my phone, the screen illuminating my trembling hand. The flashlight cast long, distorted shadows across the room, turning familiar objects into menacing shapes. I crept to the window, peering into the alleyway. The lights in the building across were still on. Then I saw him. He was standing at his window, a silhouette against the dim light, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. He wasn't looking at the alleyway. He was looking at me. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare make a sound. The lights flickered back on, the sudden brightness blinding. I blinked, trying to regain my bearings. When I looked back at the window, he was gone. I spent the rest of the night huddled on my couch, my phone clutched in my hand, every nerve on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, even though I couldn't see him. The next morning, I decided to confront him. I couldn't live like this anymore, trapped in a state of perpetual fear. I marched to his door, my hand trembling as I raised it to knock. There was no answer. I knocked again, harder this time, but still nothing. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. I hesitated, a wave of apprehension washing over me. But the need to know, to end this nightmare, was stronger than my fear. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn tight. The air was thick and stale, heavy with a strange, musty odor. The furniture was minimal: a worn armchair, a small table, a single lamp. There was no sign of him. I moved deeper into the apartment, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was almost completely bare, except for a single bed and a small desk. On the desk, there was a stack of papers. I approached the desk, my heart pounding in my ears. The papers were filled with his handwriting, the same angular script from the notes. But these weren't short, cryptic messages. These were pages and pages of rambling, incoherent sentences, a jumbled mess of words that made no sense. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the text. There were references to me, to my apartment, to my daily routine. He had been watching me obsessively, documenting every detail of my life. Then I saw it, a single line, repeated over and over again in bold, underlined letters. I know your every move. A cold dread settled over me. I turned to leave, my hand reaching for the doorknob. Then I heard it, a faint tapping sound, coming from the front door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping continued, a slow, deliberate rhythm. I crept to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the peephole. I peered through the lens. He was standing there, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes fixed on mine. In his hand, he held a folded piece of paper. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I backed away, my heart pounding against my ribs. I stumbled back into the bedroom, my eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. The tapping continued, a relentless, insistent sound. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. Please, I whispered, my voice trembling. Please hurry. The tapping stopped. A moment of silence, thick and heavy. Then a soft rustle from under the door. I looked down. A folded piece of paper slid beneath the gap. I didn't dare pick it up. I didn't dare move. I just stood there, frozen in fear, as the silence stretched on, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I stayed locked in the bedroom until the police arrived. They found the apartment empty. The man was gone. They found the note too. It read, I know your every move, even the ones you haven't made yet. They told me to move, to leave the building, to start over. I did. But even now, years later, I still hear the tapping. And I still feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. Because some silences, once broken, can never be truly filled. The hum of the bus engine, usually a comforting white noise, vibrated with an unsettling intensity. The late-night chill seeped through the cracked window, a stark contrast to the humid air inside the bus. We were the last ones, a ragtag group of teenagers returning from a late-night movie, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon and amber through the rain-streaked glass. Mr. Henderson, our usual bus driver, was different tonight. Normally, he'd be cracking jokes, sharing anecdotes about his day, a friendly presence in the otherwise empty vehicle. Tonight, however, he was a silhouette, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He hadn't said a word since we boarded, his silence a heavy, palpable thing. The first few minutes of his quiet demeanor were dismissed as tiredness. It was late, after all, and even the most gregarious individuals had their off nights. But as the minutes stretched into an unnerving silence, a sense of unease began to settle over us. We were nearing our stop, the familiar glow of streetlights and the silhouette of our neighborhood buildings coming into view. Usually, Mr. Henderson would announce the upcoming stop, a courtesy he always extended. Tonight, he didn't even slow down. Mr. Henderson, this is our stop, Sarah called out, her voice a little too loud in the quiet bus. No response. The bus continued to speed through our neighborhood, the familiar landmarks blurring past. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the empty seats. He's not stopping, whispered Mark, his voice laced with a growing anxiety. We glanced at each other, a silent agreement passing between us. Something was wrong. Mr. Henderson, I yelled, my voice echoing through the empty bus. We need to get off here. Still no response. He didn't even flinch. His posture remained rigid, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity. The bus continued its relentless journey, leaving the familiar streets behind, plunging us into the darker, less populated outskirts of the city. The silence in the bus was heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the low rumble of the engine. "We need to do something," said Emily, her voice trembling slightly. "We can't just let him keep driving." We decided to approach him, to try and get his attention, to force him to stop. We rose from our seats, our footsteps echoing in the empty bus, and made our way towards the front. As we approached the driver's seat, a cold dread settled over us. Mr. Henderson was gone. The driver's seat was empty. The steering wheel turned, seemingly on its own. The bus maintained its speed. The dashboard lights cast an eerie glow on the empty space where he should have been. Panic surged through us, a primal fear that gripped us in its icy embrace. We were alone, trapped in a speeding bus, with no one at the wheel. What's happening?" stammered Sarah, her eyes wide with terror. We stared at the empty seat, our minds struggling to comprehend the impossible. How could he have vanished? There was nowhere for him to go. The door was still closed. "We need to stop this bus," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. We scrambled towards the front, our hands reaching for the emergency brake. But the bus was moving too fast, the force too great. We couldn't reach it. The bus continued its relentless journey, the darkness outside the windows deepening, the streetlights becoming sparse and far between. We were leaving the city behind, entering a desolate, unfamiliar landscape. Then, the bus began to slow down. The engine sputtered, the lights flickered, and the bus finally came to a stop. We were in a dark, abandoned station. The platform was overgrown with weeds, the paint peeling from the walls, the windows boarded up. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. We stared out the windows, our hearts pounding in our chests. Where were we? Why had the bus stopped here? We hesitated, our fear holding us back. But the need to escape, to get away from this desolate place, was stronger than our fear. We cautiously stepped off the bus, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The bus doors hissed shut behind us, the sound echoing in the stillness. We turned to look at the bus, its headlights casting long, distorted shadows across the platform. Then we saw it, a faint light emanating from inside the bus. We peered through the windows, our eyes straining to see through the darkness. Inside we saw him, Mr. Henderson. He was sitting in one of the back seats, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. He was motionless. We cautiously approached the bus, our footsteps echoing on the deserted platform. We peered through the windows, our eyes straining to see through the darkness. He was still there, his posture unchanged. He didn't move or acknowledge us. We tried the door. It was locked. We banged on the windows, yelling his name, but he didn't respond. We were trapped, caught between the desolate station and the silent, unresponsive figure inside the bus. A cold wind swept across the platform, carrying with it the faint sound of a train whistle. But there were no tracks, no signs of a railway. We looked around, our eyes scanning the darkness, searching for a way out. But there was nothing, only the abandoned station and the empty bus. We huddled together, our fear growing with each passing moment. The silence was heavy, oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind and the distant, echoing sound of that phantom train whistle. Then we saw something moving in the shadows, a figure emerging from the darkness. It was tall, gaunt, its features obscured by the shadows. It moved towards us, its footsteps silent on the overgrown platform. We backed away, our hearts pounding in our chests. As it drew closer, we could make out its features. It was Mr. Henderson, but he was different. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale and gaunt, his expression blank. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed on us, his presence radiating an unsettling, otherworldly aura. We turned and ran, our feet pounding on the overgrown platform, our breath catching in our throats. We didn't look back. We didn't dare. We ran until we couldn't run anymore, until our lungs burned and our legs ached. We collapsed on the ground, our bodies trembling, our minds reeling from the terror of what we had just witnessed. We never saw the bus again. We never saw Mr. Henderson again. But the memory of that night, the empty bus, the abandoned station, the silent figure in the shadows, it stayed with us, a chilling reminder of the unknown terrors that lurk in the darkness. The flea market was a labyrinth of forgotten treasures and discarded memories. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, illuminating the cluttered stalls and the haggard faces of the vendors. I was drawn to a particular stall, a dimly lit corner overflowing with antique furniture and tarnished trinkets. It was there, nestled amongst a pile of dusty picture frames, that I found it, the mirror. It was an ornate Victorian-era piece, its frame carved with intricate floral patterns, its surface clouded with age. The glass was thick, slightly warped, giving the reflection a distorted, almost ethereal quality. It had a certain allure, a sense of history that whispered of forgotten stories and hidden secrets. I bought it for a steal, the vendor's eyes glinting with an unsettling amusement as he wrapped it in brown paper. Back in my dorm room, the mirror became a focal point. It added a touch of Gothic charm to the otherwise sterile space, its antique surface reflecting the room's dim light in a soft, diffused glow. At first, it was just a mirror. I'd glance at it while getting ready, checking my hair, adjusting my clothes. But as the days passed, I began to notice subtle discrepancies, fleeting glimpses of something off. One afternoon, I was studying at my desk, my back to the mirror. I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a reflection of myself standing near the window, her posture slightly different, her clothes a shade darker. I turned, but the reflection was gone, replaced by my own startled face. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a momentary illusion. But the incidents continued, each one more unsettling than the last. I'd see my reflection moving independently, its movements slightly out of sync with my own. I'd notice subtle changes in my reflected clothes, a different shirt, a different hairstyle, a different expression. One evening, I was brushing my teeth, my gaze fixed on my reflection. I noticed a faint smile playing on my reflected lips, a smile that didn't match my own. It was a cold, unsettling smile, a smile that seemed to mock my unease. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared at my reflection, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that I wasn't imagining things. But the smile remained, a fixed, unwavering expression that sent a shiver down my spine. From that point on, the mirror became a source of constant dread. I avoided looking at it, turning it to face the wall, hoping to banish the unsettling reflections. But even with its back turned, I could feel its presence, a cold, watchful eye in the room. One night, I woke to a strange stillness. The room was bathed in the pale glow of the moon, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. I turned to look at the mirror, its back still facing the wall. Then I saw it, a faint glow emanating from the mirror's surface, a soft, ethereal light that illuminated the room. I cautiously approached the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drew closer, I could see my reflection, its image shimmering in the soft light. But it wasn't my reflection. It was a distorted, twisted version of myself, its features exaggerated, its eyes wide and vacant. Then it smiled, a wide, grotesque smile that stretched across its face, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. The reflection reached out, its hand extending from the mirror's surface, its fingers long and skeletal. I screamed, stumbling back from the mirror, my body trembling with terror. I tried to run, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The reflection's hand grasped my arm, its grip cold and unyielding. I felt a strange sensation, a pulling, a tugging, as if I were being drawn into the mirror's depths. The room around me began to distort, the walls warping and twisting, the floor tilting at an impossible angle. I was being pulled into the reflection. I struggled, my body twisting and contorting, my screams echoing in the empty room. But the reflection's grip was too strong. I was pulled through the mirror's surface, my body dissolving into the swirling, ethereal light. I found myself in a distorted version of my dorm room, a mirror image of the space I had just left. Everything was the same, yet subtly different, a warped and twisted reflection of reality. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, sluggish. I tried to speak, but my voice was trapped, a silent scream echoing in my mind. I was trapped in the reflection. I saw my reflection, the twisted version of myself, standing in the doorway, its eyes fixed on me, its smile wide and menacing. It raised its hand, its fingers beckoning me forward. I tried to resist, but my body moved on its own, compelled by an unseen force. I walked towards the reflection, my footsteps echoing in the distorted room. As I drew closer, I could see the reflection's eyes, their depths filled with a cold, empty void. I reached out, my hand trembling, my fingers brushing against the mirror's surface. The reflection's hand grasped mine, its grip cold and firm. It pulled me closer, our faces inches apart. Then the reflection spoke, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "You're mine now." I screamed, a silent scream that echoed in the distorted space. I tried to break free, but the reflection's grip was too strong. I was trapped, bound to the mirror's surface, forever trapped in my own reflection. The room around me began to fade, the distorted images dissolving into a swirling vortex of light and shadow. I was being pulled into the depths of the mirror, into a realm of twisted reflections and forgotten nightmares. And as the darkness consumed me, I heard the faint echo of a smile, a cold, unsettling smile that echoed in the silence of my own trapped reflection. The neighborhood had been on edge for weeks. A string of petty burglaries, mostly snatched packages and pilfered garden tools, had eroded the sense of safety that once permeated our quiet cul-de-sac. It was a creeping unease, a constant awareness of the shadows, of the rustling leaves that might conceal a lurking figure. I, like many of my neighbors, decided to invest in a security system. A simple setup, a few cameras strategically placed around the exterior of my apartment, linked to an app on my phone. It was a small price to pay for peace of mind, a digital shield against the unseen threat. The first few days were uneventful. The cameras captured the mundane rhythms of daily life. The mailman delivering letters, the stray cat slinking through the bushes, the occasional car passing by. I checked the footage periodically, a habit born of anxiety, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Then came the night that changed everything. I'd worked late, a rush project keeping me at the office until well past midnight. Exhausted, I stumbled into my apartment, the silence amplifying the lingering tension. Before collapsing into bed, I decided to check the security footage, a routine I'd developed out of habit. I scrolled through the timeline, the app displaying snippets of the day's events. I saw myself leaving for work in the morning, the empty driveway, the fading light of the afternoon. Everything seemed normal. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the living room, a figure moving across the frame. My heart pounded in my chest. Someone was inside. I rewound the footage, my fingers trembling. The figure moved again, its movements slow, deliberate. It was a person, their silhouette clear against the dim light of the apartment. I zoomed in, my eyes straining to make out the details. The figure was wearing my clothes. The same shirt I'd worn to work, the same jeans, the same shoes. A cold dread settled over me. This wasn't a random burglar. This was something else, something far more unsettling. I watched as the figure moved through the apartment, mimicking my actions from earlier that day. It walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and took out a bottle of water, just as I had. It sat on the couch, flipping through the channels on the television, just as I had. It was as if it were replaying my day, a distorted, unsettling echo of my own movements. The figure then began to move closer to the camera, its movements growing slower, more deliberate. It tilted its head, as if listening, as if trying to hear something beyond the lens. Its eyes, though obscured by the shadows, seemed to fix on the camera on me. It was as if it knew I was watching. Then the footage cut off abruptly. The screen went black, the app displaying a connection error message. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my apartment. I tried to reconnect to the cameras, but the app remained unresponsive. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the figure were still watching me, even though the cameras were offline. I couldn't stay in the apartment. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and fled into the night, the darkness amplifying my fear. I drove to a 24-hour diner, the bright lights and the murmur of conversation offering a temporary respite from the terror. I spent the next few hours huddled in a booth, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of the figure. I tried to make sense of what I had seen, but my mind kept returning to the image of the figure, its eyes fixed on the camera, its movements a chilling imitation of my own. As the sun began to rise, I decided to return to my apartment. I needed to know if the figure was still there, if the cameras were still offline. I approached my apartment cautiously, my eyes scanning the windows, searching for any sign of movement. The apartment appeared empty, the curtains drawn, the lights off. I unlocked the door, my hand trembling, and stepped inside. The apartment was silent, the air heavy with an unsettling stillness. I checked the security system. The cameras were back online, the app displaying a live feed of the empty apartment. I reviewed the footage from the past few hours, but there was nothing, just the empty rooms, the silent hallways. I decided to change the locks, to reinforce the security of my apartment. I went to the hardware store, bought new locks, and returned to my apartment. As I approached the door, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, the lock jimmied. My heart pounded in my chest. I cautiously pushed the door open, my eyes scanning the apartment. The figure was standing in the living room, its back to me. It was wearing my clothes, its posture an exact replica of my own. It turned, its face obscured by the shadows, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I've been waiting for you," it said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. I froze, my body paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure took a step towards me, its movements slow, deliberate. It reached into its pocket and pulled out a knife. "You shouldn't have watched the footage," it said, its voice a chilling whisper. I tried to scream, but my voice was trapped, a silent scream echoing in my mind. The figure lunged forward, the knife flashing in the dim light. The last thing I saw was the figure's face, its features a distorted, twisted version of my own, its eyes filled with a cold, empty void. Then, darkness. The second-hand smartphone felt cold in my hand, a sleek, obsidian rectangle that promised a fresh start. My old phone, a battered relic, had finally given up the ghost, and this affordable replacement was a lifeline in the digital age. I'd found it at a local pawn shop, its previous owner's data wiped, or so I thought, and its screen gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Initially, it was a seamless transition. I downloaded my essential apps, synced my contacts, and felt a familiar sense of connection to the digital world. But then the anomalies began. It started subtly, a notification popping up from an unfamiliar social media app, a generic icon, and a name I didn't recognize. _Elias_. Curiosity piqued. I tapped the notification, revealing an account that seemed dormant, a scattering of old posts and a profile picture of a blurry, indistinct figure. I dismissed it as a glitch, a remnant of the previous owner's digital footprint. But then, the messages started. The first one was innocuous enough. "You're using my phone." A chill ran down my spine. How could someone know? I checked the account's activity, but there was nothing recent, no indication of anyone actively using it. I chalked it up to a coincidence, a random message sent before the phone was wiped. But the messages persisted, growing increasingly specific, increasingly unsettling. "You're drinking coffee," it read, followed minutes later by, "You're wearing a blue shirt." These were not guesses. They were observations, detailed and precise. I felt a creeping sense of paranoia, a feeling of being watched, of being followed. I tried to ignore the messages, to dismiss them as a bizarre prank. But the account seemed to anticipate my every move, its messages appearing just moments before I performed the actions they described. "You're going to the grocery store," it read, just as I was about to leave my apartment. "Don't buy the milk." The last part, the seemingly random command, sent a shiver down my spine. It was a subtle shift, a move from observation to control. I decided to investigate. I scrolled through the account's old posts, searching for any clues, any indication of who _Elias_ was. The posts were fragmented, cryptic, filled with disjointed sentences and unsettling imagery. There were references to a watcher, a presence, and a digital cage. The more I read, the more I felt a sense of dread. This wasn't just a prank. This was something else, something darker, something more sinister. The messages escalated. "You're going to sleep," it read, followed by, "You won't wake up." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, my eyes glued to the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. The messages continued, growing more threatening, more personal. "I know your secrets," it read. "I know your fears." The account seemed to have access to my deepest, darkest thoughts, my hidden anxieties, my buried traumas. It was as if it were peering into my soul, exposing my vulnerabilities. I decided to take action. I tried to delete the account, to erase its presence from my phone. But every time I deleted it, it reappeared, its messages growing more chilling, more insistent. "You can't escape," it read. "I'm always watching." I tried to wipe the phone clean, to perform a factory reset, to erase all data and start anew. But even after the reset, the account remained, its messages appearing on the blank screen, a digital ghost refusing to be exorcised. I felt trapped, caught in a digital nightmare, a victim of an unseen presence that seemed to control my phone, my life. The messages were no longer just observations, they were predictions, warnings of events that were about to unfold. "You're going to fall," it read, just as I was walking down a flight of stairs. I stumbled, nearly losing my balance, my heart pounding in my chest. The predictions grew more violent, more threatening. "You're going to die," it read, followed by, "I'm going to make sure of it." I felt a sense of desperation, a feeling of being hunted, of being stalked by an unseen predator. I tried to seek help, to explain my situation, but no one believed me. They dismissed it as a delusion, a product of my overactive imagination. I was alone, trapped in a digital prison with no escape. The phone, once a lifeline, had become a weapon, a conduit for an unseen force that sought to destroy me. One night, the messages stopped. The silence was deafening, a chilling void that amplified my fear. I waited, my breath held, my eyes fixed on the phone. Then a new message appeared. "I'm here." The phone's camera app opened, revealing a live feed of my apartment. I saw myself, my reflection in the darkened screen, my eyes wide with terror. Then I saw something else. A figure, standing behind me, its silhouette clear against the dim light of the hallway. It was _Elias_. The figure moved closer, its movements slow, deliberate. It reached out, its hand extending towards the phone, towards me. The screen went black. I never saw the figure's face. I never knew its intentions. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, it never left me. The digital haunting had become a reality, a chilling reminder of the unseen terrors that lurk in the shadows of our connected world. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was a monotonous rhythm, a lullaby of the open road. It was late, well past midnight, and the highway stretched before me, a ribbon of black under the pale glow of the moon. I was driving home after a late shift, the weariness of the day settling into my bones. The road was deserted, the only other vehicle a distant set of headlights in my rearview mirror. I paid it little attention, focusing on the road ahead, on the promise of a warm bed and a few hours of sleep. Then I noticed it. The headlights in my rearview mirror were closer, much closer. The car was tailgating me, its headlights blindingly bright, its presence a pressure against my back. I eased off the gas, hoping the car would pass. But it didn't. It remained behind me, its headlights unwavering, its presence a constant, unsettling pressure. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us. But the car matched my pace, its engine a low, menacing growl. It was as if it were toying with me, testing my limits. A sense of unease settled over me. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just someone in a hurry. This was something else, something more sinister. I tried to shake the car, changing lanes, varying my speed, but nothing worked. It remained behind me, a silent, relentless stalker. The isolation of the highway amplified my fear. The darkness seemed to press in, the empty miles stretching before me like an endless void. I felt trapped, caught in a game with unseen rules, a game I didn't understand. I glanced at my phone, searching for a signal, for a lifeline to the outside world. But there was nothing, just the empty bars, a stark reminder of my isolation. I decided to pull over, to stop at the next rest stop, hoping to lose the car in the process. Maybe if I stopped long enough, they'd simply drive on. The rest stop was a small, dimly lit oasis in the vast expanse of the highway. A few vending machines, a couple of picnic tables, and a single, flickering streetlight. I pulled into a parking spot, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned off the engine, the silence amplifying the tension. I watched the rearview mirror, waiting for the car to pass. But it didn't. It pulled into the rest stop, parking a few spaces away. I hesitated, my hand gripping the steering wheel. I didn't want to get out. I didn't want to face whoever was in that car. But I couldn't stay in my car forever. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out. The cool night air was a welcome relief, but the fear remained, a cold knot in my stomach. I walked towards the back of my car, pretending to check my license plate, my eyes scanning the rest stop, searching for any sign of movement. The car was still parked a few spaces away, its headlights off, its windows tinted. I couldn't see who was inside. I walked towards the vending machines, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I pretended to browse the snacks, my eyes darting around, searching for an escape route. Then I heard it, the sound of a car door closing. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest. The car was moving slowly, deliberately, pulling up next to me. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing a face obscured by the shadows. I couldn't make out the features, but I could feel the intensity of the gaze, the weight of the stare. "I've been following you for miles," the driver whispered, their voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Your next move is my decision." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in the headlights of the car, caught in the gaze of the unseen driver. The driver's words hung in the air, a chilling declaration of power, a stark reminder of my vulnerability. I felt a sense of dread, a feeling of being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The driver's hand moved, reaching towards the center console. I braced myself, expecting the worst. Then the driver's hand stopped. It held a small, folded piece of paper. "Take this," the driver whispered, extending the paper towards me. I hesitated, my hand trembling, but I reached out and took the paper. "Read it when you get home," the driver said, their voice a chilling whisper. The driver rolled up the window, and the car pulled away, disappearing into the darkness of the highway. I stood there, my hand trembling, the folded piece of paper clutched in my grasp. I watched the taillights disappear into the distance, my mind reeling from the encounter. I got back into my car, my hands shaking as I turned the key. I drove home, my eyes fixed on the road, my mind filled with the driver's words, with the chilling promise of the note. When I got home, I went straight to my bedroom, locked the door, and unfolded the piece of paper. It was a single sentence written in a stark, angular script. "You're never alone." I stared at the note, my heart pounding in my chest. The words were a chilling reminder of the driver's presence, of the unseen eyes that had been watching me, of the feeling that I was never truly alone. I crumpled the note, tossing it into the trash. But the feeling remained, a cold, lingering dread that settled into my bones. I never drove that road again. I avoided late-night drives, and I always checked my rearview mirror, searching for the telltale glow of headlights in the darkness. Because some journeys, once taken, leave a shadow that never truly fades. The online listing seemed like a godsend. Finding affordable housing near campus was a constant struggle, and when I stumbled upon Sarah's profile, it felt like a stroke of luck. She was looking for a roommate, her profile clean and straightforward, her responses prompt and polite. We met for coffee, and she seemed perfectly normal, if a little reserved. We moved in together a week later, splitting the rent on a small, 2-bedroom apartment. Initially, everything was fine. Sarah was quiet, almost to the point of being reclusive, but she was respectful of my space and always paid her share of the bills on time. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice subtle, unsettling changes. She rarely left her room, and when she did, it was only to grab food from the fridge or use the bathroom, always avoiding eye contact. I'd try to strike up a conversation, but she'd respond with monosyllabic answers, her gaze fixed on the floor. The silence in the apartment became heavy, oppressive. The only sounds were the muffled creaks of the building and the faint hum of the refrigerator. But at night, things changed. I'd lie in bed, trying to sleep, and I'd hear faint, muffled conversations coming from Sarah's room. It sounded like she was talking to someone, but I never heard another voice. It was always her voice a low, indistinct murmur that seemed to fill the apartment. I'd try to listen, to make out what she was saying, but the words were always too garbled, too indistinct. It was as if she were whispering, or talking into a pillow. The conversations would go on for hours, sometimes until the early hours of the morning. I'd lie awake, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with questions. Who was she talking to? Why was she so secretive? One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, my footsteps silent on the carpet, and crept towards her room. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to hear what she was saying. The muffled conversations were there, her voice a low, rhythmic murmur. But I still couldn't make out the words. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I knew I was invading her privacy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned the doorknob, slowly, carefully, and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway. Sarah wasn't in bed. She was sitting at her desk, her back to me, her head bowed. I took a step into the room, my voice a whisper in the silence. "Sarah?" She didn't respond. I took another step, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah, are you okay?" She still didn't respond. I walked towards her, my hand reaching out to touch her shoulder. Then I saw it. The screen of her laptop was illuminated, displaying a chat window. But there was no other person present in the chat. It was her, sending messages to herself, creating a conversation between two different accounts. My blood ran cold. She wasn't talking to someone. She was talking to herself. I backed away, my mind reeling from the discovery. I didn't understand. Why was she doing this? What was going on? I left the room, closing the door behind me, and returned to my own bed. I lay awake for the rest of the night, my mind filled with questions, my body trembling with unease. The next morning, I decided to confront her. I couldn't live like this anymore, trapped in a state of constant anxiety. I knocked on her door, my hand trembling. "Sarah, can we talk?" There was no response. I knocked again, louder this time. "Sarah, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Still no response. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty. The bed was unmade, the desk was bare, and the closet door was slightly ajar. I cautiously approached the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed the door open and peered inside. The closet was filled with clothes, but they weren't Sarah's. They were men's clothes, suits, shirts, ties. I searched through the pockets, finding a wallet. Inside, there was an ID, but it wasn't Sarah's. It was a man's ID, with a different name, a different face. I felt a wave of dizziness, a sense of disorientation. Who was this person? Who was Sarah? I searched through the rest of the room, finding more evidence of a double life. There were multiple phones, each with different SIM cards, each with different social media accounts. There were maps, marked with locations I didn't recognize. There were photos, but they weren't photos of Sarah. They were photos of different people, different places. I felt a sense of dread, a feeling of being trapped in a mystery I didn't understand. Then, I found something that made my blood run cold. A small, handwritten note tucked inside a book. It read, "She doesn't suspect a thing. The plan is working perfectly." I didn't know what the plan was, but I knew I had to get out. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and fled the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I never returned. I never saw Sarah or the man whose ID I found again. I changed my number, moved to a different apartment, and tried to forget what I had seen. But the memory of the empty room, the closet filled with men's clothes, the note, it stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the secrets that can lurk behind closed doors, and of the people who may never truly exist. The phone rang, a jarring intrusion into the late-night quiet. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Annoying, but not unusual. I answered a weary hello, escaping my lips. A static-filled silence met me, punctuated by a faint, almost imperceptible murmur. "Hello," I repeated, my voice slightly louder. Then a voice. Distorted, barely audible, but unmistakably mine. "Hello," the voice echoed, a chilling imitation of my own greeting. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice tight. Silence. Then a low chuckle, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You know who this is?" I hung up, my heart pounding in my chest. A prank call, I told myself. A sick joke. But the voice, the way it mimicked my own, it felt personal. The phone rang again, the same unknown number flashing on the screen. I hesitated, then answered, my voice laced with anger. "Stop calling me." "Why?" the voice asked, its tone mocking. "Don't you want to talk?" "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded. Silence. Then a whisper. "Remember the summer of '98? My breath caught in my throat. The summer of '98. A memory I'd buried deep, a secret I'd never shared with anyone. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, my voice trembling. The voice chuckled again, a low, guttural sound. "The lake. The accident. The silence. The details were too specific, too personal. It couldn't be a coincidence." "How do you know that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I know everything," the voice replied, its tone laced with malice. "Everything you've done, everything you've hidden." It began to recount other secrets, other buried memories, each one more personal, more disturbing than the last. It spoke of my family's darkest secrets, things I'd never even whispered to my closest confidants. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the impossible. How could this person know these things? How could they know my deepest, darkest secrets? The voice grew more aggressive, its tone shifting from mocking to threatening. "You can't escape your past," it hissed. "You can't escape your fate." I tried to track the number, using every online tool I could find. But the number was untraceable, a digital ghost. I tried calling the police, but they dismissed it as a prank, a waste of their time. The calls continued throughout the night, each one more terrifying than the last. The voice seemed to anticipate my every move, my every thought. It knew when I was trying to track the number, when I was trying to call the police. "You're wasting your time," it mocked. "I'm everywhere. I'm in your phone, in your computer, in your mind." My life began to unravel. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next call, the next revelation, the next threat. I changed my number, bought a new phone, but the calls continued, the same distorted voice, the same chilling revelations. It was as if the voice were inside my head, following me wherever I went. I began to see things, to hear things, to feel things. Shadows moving in the corner of my eye, whispers in the empty rooms, a cold, unseen presence that followed me everywhere. I was losing my grip on reality, trapped in a nightmare that seemed to have no end. One night, the phone rang, the same unknown number flashing on the screen. I answered, my voice a broken whisper. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand," the voice replied, its tone almost gentle. "You can't run from yourself. You can't hide from your past. Who are you? I begged, my voice cracking. "Please, tell me who you are." "I'm you," the voice replied, its tone cold and final. "I'm the part of you that you've tried to bury, the part you've tried to forget." A wave of nausea washed over me. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be me. Then the voice spoke again, its tone laced with a chilling finality. "It's time to face your fate." The phone went dead. I sat in the darkness, my body trembling, my mind reeling. I didn't know what to believe, what to do. I felt trapped, caught in a cycle of fear and paranoia, a cycle that seemed to have no escape. I looked at my reflection in the darkened screen of my phone. The face staring back at me was pale, gaunt, haunted. Then I saw something else. A faint flicker of movement in the reflection, a shadow behind my own. A cold dread settled over me. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest. No one was there, but I knew with a chilling certainty that I wasn't alone. The voice was right. I couldn't escape. I couldn't hide, because some calls, once answered, can never be truly disconnected. And some secrets, once revealed, can never be truly buried. The empty space where her bed used to be was a constant, gnawing reminder. Sarah's disappearance had left a void, a chilling silence that permeated our shared dorm room. It was as if a part of the room, a part of my life, had simply been erased. We'd been roommates for a year, a comfortable, if somewhat distant, coexistence. Sarah was quiet, kept to herself, but she was never unfriendly. One morning, I woke up and she was gone. No note, no message, no sign of struggle. Just an empty bed and a lingering sense of unease. Her belongings were all there. Clothes neatly folded in the drawers, books stacked on her desk, even her laptop, left open on her bed, the screen displaying a half-finished essay. It was as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. I reported her disappearance to the campus security, who in turn contacted the local police. They searched the dorm, questioned our mutual acquaintances, but found nothing. No leads, no clues, no explanation. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation stalled. The police eventually told me the case was closed. No signs of foul play, no evidence of abduction, no indication that Sarah had left of her own volition. Just nothing. The official explanation was that she'd simply decided to leave, to start a new life somewhere else. It was a convenient explanation, a way to close the books on a case they couldn't solve. But it didn't sit right with me. It didn't explain the abandoned belongings, the unfinished essay, the complete lack of contact. The unease I felt turned into a gnawing anxiety. The empty space in the room became a constant reminder of the unanswered questions, the unresolved mystery. And then the sightings began. It started subtly. A fleeting glimpse of Sarah in the crowded library, her face obscured by a book, her posture rigid and tense. I blinked, and she was gone, swallowed by the sea of students. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a momentary illusion, a product of my overactive imagination. But then the sightings continued, growing more frequent, more vivid. I'd see her walking down the hallway, her head bowed, her footsteps silent. I'd see her sitting in a lecture hall, her gaze fixed on the professor, her expression blank and emotionless. I'd see her in the cafeteria, her hands trembling as she held a tray of food, her eyes darting around the room, as if searching for something or someone. Each sighting was fleeting, a momentary glimpse, a flicker of recognition before she vanished again. It was as if she were a ghost, a phantom, a figment of my imagination. The sightings were unsettling, but they also offered a sliver of hope. Maybe she wasn't gone. Maybe she was still here, somewhere on campus, hiding in plain sight. I decided to follow her, to try and get closer, to try and talk to her. But every time I tried, she'd disappear, slipping through the crowds, vanishing into thin air. One afternoon, I saw her sitting on a bench outside the student union, her gaze fixed on the bustling crowd. I approached her cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She turned, her eyes wide, her face pale. She looked different. Her eyes held a vacant, almost hollow look, and her skin had a sickly pallor. "Sarah, it's me," I said, my voice louder this time. "It's my name." She stared at me, her expression blank. Then she whispered, her voice barely audible, "You shouldn't have reported me." The words hung in the air, a chilling accusation. Before I could respond, she stood up and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there, frozen, my mind reeling. What did she mean? Why shouldn't I have reported her? The encounter left me more confused, more unsettled than ever. It was as if she were warning me, threatening me. I decided to investigate, to try and uncover the truth behind her disappearance. I started by searching through her social media accounts, but they were all inactive, abandoned. I searched through her emails, but there was nothing, just old messages from friends and family. I started talking to her friends, her classmates, anyone who might have known her. But no one had any answers. No one had seen her since she disappeared. The more I searched, the more I felt a sense of dread. It was as if she'd never existed, as if she were a ghost, a phantom, a figment of my imagination. I started to question my own sanity. Were the sightings real? Was I imagining things? Was I losing my mind? The fear was constant, a gnawing anxiety that followed me everywhere. I felt like I was being watched, like I was being followed. I'd glance over my shoulder, expecting to see Sarah's pale face, her vacant eyes. One night, I woke up to a strange sound, a faint scratching sound coming from the closet. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I listened, my breath held. The scratching sound continued, a slow, rhythmic rasp. I cautiously got out of bed, my footsteps silent on the carpet, and crept towards the closet. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. I opened the closet door. Sarah was standing inside, her back to me, her head bowed. She was scratching at the wall with her fingernails, leaving long, jagged marks. I gasped, my voice a whisper. "Sarah?" She turned, her eyes wide, her face contorted in a silent scream. Then she vanished, leaving only the scratches on the wall, a chilling reminder of her presence. I slammed the closet door shut, my body trembling. I knew then that she wasn't coming back. She was gone, trapped somewhere between this world and the next, a phantom haunting the halls of my memory. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I should have heeded her warning. I shouldn't have reported her, because some disappearances are better left unsolved. The rusted gates, choked with overgrown weeds, groaned as we forced them open. The abandoned St. Augustine's Hospital loomed before us, a skeletal silhouette against the fading twilight. It was a local legend, a place whispered about in hushed tones, rumored to be a repository of forgotten pain and lingering spirits. We were a group of thrill-seekers, drawn to the hospital's dark allure, seeking a fleeting rush of adrenaline. We'd heard the stories, the unexplained deaths, the whispered cries, the lingering scent of antiseptic and decay. It was a perfect setting for a night of urban exploration, a chance to test our courage against the unknown. The main entrance was boarded up, but a broken window on the side provided a precarious entry. We slipped inside, the darkness swallowing us whole. The air was thick with the musty smell of damp concrete and decay, a chilling reminder of the hospital's long abandonment. We activated our flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness, revealing peeling paint, crumbling ceilings, and the ghostly outlines of abandoned medical equipment. The silence was heavy, broken only by the echo of our footsteps and the occasional creak of the building settling. We ventured deeper into the hospital, exploring the labyrinthine corridors and decaying rooms. We found abandoned operating theaters, their surgical lights long extinguished, their stainless steel tables covered in a layer of dust. We found patient rooms, their beds stripped bare, their walls covered in faded wallpaper. The atmosphere was oppressive, a sense of lingering sorrow that seemed to permeate the very walls. We found old medical records scattered on the floor, their pages filled with cryptic diagnoses and unsettling notes. We saw faded photographs of patients, their eyes filled with a haunting sadness. As we explored, a sense of unease began to settle over us. We felt watched, as if unseen eyes were following our every move. The shadows seemed to deepen, to take on a life of their own. Then, the strange occurrences began. The lights flickered, casting distorted shadows that danced across the walls. We heard faint cries, distant whispers, the sound of dragging footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. We tried to dismiss it as our imaginations, as the tricks of the darkness. But the occurrences grew more frequent, more intense. The feeling of being watched intensified, a cold, prickling sensation on our skin. We decided to leave, to abandon our exploration, and return to the safety of the outside world. But when we reached the main entrance, we found the door locked, the heavy wooden frame sealed shut. Panic began to set in. We tried our phones, but there was no signal, no connection to the outside world. We were trapped, isolated, at the mercy of whatever lurked within the hospital's walls. The shadows in the hallways seemed to move, to coalesce, to take on a more defined shape. We heard the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from the darkness. We scattered, fleeing into the labyrinthine corridors, searching for an escape. We found a locked door, a heavy steel barrier that seemed to lead to a hidden room. We forced it open, our hearts pounding in our chests. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The air was thick with the smell of formaldehyde and old paper. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, their drawers overflowing with documents. We began to search through the files, hoping to find a clue, an escape route. But what we found was far more disturbing. The files contained detailed medical records, but they weren't just for the hospital's former patients. They included records for us, our names, our medical histories, our deepest fears and anxieties. And then we found the files that chilled us to the bone. Files that seemed to predict our futures, our deaths, our fates. The files contained detailed descriptions of how each of us would die, the circumstances, the locations, the dates. We stared at the files, our minds reeling, our bodies trembling. It was as if someone or something had known our fates, had written them down in advance. The footsteps grew closer, the sound echoing in the hallway. We knew we had to leave, to escape the room, to escape the hospital. We fled the room, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The shadows were closing in, the darkness pressing in on us. We ran, our lungs burning, our hearts pounding, our minds filled with the chilling predictions of our fates. We found a back exit, a rusted metal door that led to a loading dock. We forced it open and stumbled into the night, the cool air a welcome relief. We didn't stop running until we reached our car, our bodies trembling, our minds reeling. We drove away, leaving the abandoned hospital behind, its dark silhouette fading into the distance. But the memory of the files, the chilling predictions, it stayed with us, a constant gnawing fear. We knew we couldn't escape our fates, that the hospital had revealed a truth we couldn't ignore. Because some places, once entered, leave a mark that can never be erased. And some truths, once revealed, can never be unlearned.